generative AI. And before we get into our topic, I want to share 3 things about me. Now, I come from the US, and my family and I, we are very food motivated. We love to share pictures of food throughout my picture news feed, my photos, everywhere. We have pictures of food, from milkshakes that we've had to Ethiopian food, to Mexican food, to Russian food the other week. We love to share pictures of food and our food adventures. Another thing about me is that I really love roller coasters. These are 2 of my favorite roller coasters. The taller and steeper the dive on the coaster, the more I love the roller coaster. And third is that I love to give high fives. And in the US, we use high fives as a way to celebrate and get excitement around things that we're doing. So here's our first high five to start off our session today. Today, I'm going to have, as a goal, is for you to leave with one idea that you can use in your classroom. At the end of the session, I want you to share that idea with me. So be on the lookout for when I ask for that. Now that you understand 3 things, you know 3 things about me, and you understand the goal for today's session, let's now celebrate being together while I go through 3 topics related to teaching critical thinking in the age of generative AI. Let's get started. When you think about this word, jumper, how would you define it? How would you define the word jumper? You can post your ideas in the chat, or you can just think about, what is jumper? Perhaps you are like me and you think of someone who jumps on a trampoline or off an object. Or perhaps you're like some of my family members who think of what I would consider a sweater, but they call it a jumper. Let's do another one. How would you define the word post? Post. What is a post? When I think of a post, I think of a fence post. Maybe you think of the kind of post that you get in the mail. These differences in language are what I think make it interesting. Let's celebrate those differences in language by giving us a high five. Fantastic. Our language is different depending on where we are and the experiences that we've had. And this is why I think it's really important that we talk about these things when we're using generative AI. So this is a quote from a student who is talking about their use of generative AI in helping them to write in English. And they said, to be honest, I think I became unable to have confidence in my English writing ability. This does not mean that I made many mistakes, but every time ChatGPT proofread my English, it suggested far better sentences than I wrote. Many times, I wondered why I could not have written those quality sentences by myself. To me, that confirms how important it is for us as teachers to help students navigate this generative AI. While the student is getting more grammatically correct sentences, what is lost in having GenAI change the student's writing? Some things I think are lost are students' individual voice, the cultural differences in writing, as I highlighted in our warm-up, and critical thinking, as students may accept the changes made by generative AI without considering if it really represents them. And the research finds this to be true in the bias of recommendation made. I don't want any of these things to happen to my students. I don't want them to lose their voice. I don't want their writing to be less culturally diverse. And I really want them to think about how they're incorporating the suggestions of generative AI in ways that help them to retain those things. So one way that I teach my students how to use technologies, including generative AI, is through the gradual release of responsibility model. In this model, there are 4 components: focused instruction, where I do it as a teacher; guided instruction, where we do it together, meaning that I do it with my learners; collaborative learning, meaning that my students do it together in groups, in pairs, they work together; and independent learning, meaning that they do it on their own by themselves. While it seems like this is a linear model, it actually isn't. You can do these 4 steps in any order. What does this look like in my classroom? Specifically, if we're going to use generative AI, let me show you an example. I start by asking my students independently to use a generative AI model, such as Perplexity, to get 3 words to describe the weather. I generally teach beginning and low intermediate levels of English, and learning about the weather is really common. We learn about, we talk about, we write about the weather. So in asking my students to do this, one of my beginning students asked Perplexity this prompt: weather words beginning. And this is what they received. I don't know about you, but this is much more complicated than what my student can manage. The words are more complicated, the language is more complicated. The point of starting here is not for my students to struggle, but to activate their critical thinking skills in looking at the responses or the output that they get from generative AI, so that they understand the need for learner training. I then will do some guided instruction where we will work together using Perplexity to get 3 words they can use in their writing. As I do this and I prompt and get outputs alongside my students, I get something that looks like this. This seems much more appropriate to the level of students that I teach. However, I live in a place where it doesn't get cold often. So I'm not sure if that's one of the words I really want, and I might refine or ask GenAI to give me a different word alongside our students to replace that word. In the interest of time, I'm just going to move to the next step, but that shows you sort of the guide and instruction that we're doing together. In the next part of this activity, I asked my students to work together to discuss what was similar and different in what they did individually first and what we did together. And this is activating more critical thinking skills around the use of GenAI, specifically as a brainstorming partner. So they're going to talk about what were the similarities, what were the differences, what did it look like. After they have some discussion on this, I'll do a little bit of focused instruction, providing some instruction on using GenAI for brainstorming. I'll give them tips on how to effectively use it based on what we did together and their discussions. I'll ask them for some insights into what they learned through the previous tasks as I do this focused instruction. I might end by having my students independently use GenAI to generate a list of 3 words that they can use to write a paragraph on the weather. They then will use those words and write that paragraph. Throughout this, I have provided my students learner training in using GenAI to be an effective learning partner, where they hopefully are thinking more critically about its use. As a teacher, I think it's a mistake to say that your students are using GenAI so they don't need this kind of training, when in fact, you are an expert in learning, and most of your students need you to help them navigate how to use GenAI effectively for language learning. The research agrees, where students place learner training as one of the most important things they want from teachers for helping them to use GenAI. Let's get some high fives for teaching our students how to use GenAI effectively through learner training. Let's move on to our next topic. I have a question for you. Are you a salad or an ice cream? Are you an orange juice or a coffee? Are you a sandwich or a bowl of soup? Just choose one pair, and you can use this sentence down here at the bottom to answer or just think about it. Which one are you and why? Are you a salad or an ice cream? Why? Are you an orange juice or coffee? Why? Are you a sandwich or a bowl of soup? Why? Now for me, I am an ice cream because I love sweet things. And so I feel like I would be full of sweetness like ice cream. Excellent work. Let's get some high fives for choosing our pairs. In this exercise, we're teaching our students critical thinking skills and allowing them individual choice to consider different options. We can also build tasks to help our students think critically when we use GenAI. Thank you for the high fives in the chat. I love it. Keep those high fives coming. One way that I think about creating critical thinking is by using Bloom's revised taxonomy to help me. You may be familiar with Bloom's taxonomy, but if not, there are 6 levels. Sorry about that. Let me get that back. There we go. That help us to teach critical thinking. There are 6 levels, and the 3 top levels help us to teach critical thinkings. That doesn't mean that we can't teach critical thinking using the lower levels. Just typically, we don't hit critical thinking skills when we're just remembering, understanding, and applying. We usually hit them when we hit that analyze. That's where we take info apart and explore relationships. That definitely sounds like critical thinking to me. Evaluating. We critically examine info and make judgments. And it's got critically right in the definition of it. And then creating, using information to create something new. Sometimes I have a hard time taking this model and considering what it looks like when I use technology. So one way to help you is the SAMR model. This model has 4 levels. Substitution, where you take tasks that you used to do with text and you just substitute it for technology. They used to write in paper and now they type on the computer. Augmentation, your tasks are improved due to tech use. A lot of us use quizzing apps where students are quizzed using Kahoot or Quizlet. That's a form of augmentation. Modification, tasks are reimagined due to the technology. And redefinition, new tasks are impossible without technology. Now, the SAMR model can said to be aligned to Bloom's taxonomy kind of in this way, looking at the colors across here. When I think about incorporating critical thinking and GenAI in my classroom, I think about these upper levels in both models. So if you look, the analyze, create, evaluate, and create are somewhat aligned to the modification and redefinition. So we want to reimagine our tasks due to technology, and we want to redefine our tasks with the technology. This doesn't mean that, again, we aren't using critical thinking at the other skills. It just means we are more likely to be using critical thinking at these higher skills and are able to utilize the technology in new and innovative ways. So what does this look like? I may modify my classroom so that students will have a debate with GenAI. In doing so, they have to think critically about the topic they're debating on. They have to do their own research in order to successfully argue the debate. And they have to do research on both sides, whichever side they're debating and the opposite side that GenAI is going to debate. And they have to use their language skills. Students in my class get really competitive with having a debate with GenAI. They're more engaged as they're talking about, the technology. They're excited about working with the GenAI, and they're ready to learn about the topic in ways that they weren't necessarily before. So all of these things happen before they might engage the GenAI. Hopefully, when you're using the gradual release of responsibility model, as I talked about in the previous topic, to support students so they can successfully finish the assignment. So GenAI will debate at multiple language levels. And I saw there was a question in the chat. How do you decide which level to be operating on? And that's such a good question, because GenAI will operate on multiple levels, and you need to operate at the level that your students are on. So typically, I know which level my students are working on. And that's one of the things that I need to help my students understand, is which level they're working on so that they can prompt GenAI at that level. So whether or not they're a beginning level, an intermediate level, an advanced level. I often help them understand which level on CEFR, the Common European Framework, they're working on. If they're A1, A2, B1, B2, because in doing that, they're going to get a little bit better responses. And this is not something that my learners know. They may know their beginning, but if I tell them they're an A1 or an A2, they're going to get better responses from GenAI. And as I see my students moving up in the levels, I might say, well, now try A2. And my student may not be able to know that they're ready for the next level, but me as the teacher, I know and can guide them to the next level. So having a debate, again, I often teach beginning and intermediate, and they sometimes really struggle with having debates in real time. And so having the debate with GenAI lowers their affective filter. And the GenAI can speak at the same level that they are at, and they can practice the language at the level they're at with arguments that are appropriate for their level. What students turn into me is their output from the GenAI. So I can see the kinds of questions they asked, the kinds of arguments they made, the kinds of arguments that the GenAI made, and see their language use in real time with the GenAI. So they give what they actually produced alongside the GenAI. So in that question from Royal English, when my students encounter language that's too complicated for them, I do teach them, can you do this one level or two levels below to help them navigate when they're in live chats. If they're reading, I say, if you're reading and it's 4 or 5 words in a sentence that you don't understand. It's more complicated than what you're able to navigate, and you need to ask for it for 1 or 2 levels or for a specific level. So let's get some high fives for having our students do classroom tasks that teach critical thinking using GenAI, such as debate. Now, we're coming to one of my favorite topics on the use of GenAI. So I'm going to start this by playing a game I like to call, Which Technology Are They Talking About? I'm going to give you a little bit of time to answer in the chat which technology you think they're talking about. So here's the quote. This technology is a dangerous technology because it can lead to a loss of memory. It is a reminder rather than a true art of memory. Which technology do you think they are talking about? It's dangerous technology because it can lead to a loss of memory. It's a reminder rather than a true art of memory. Are you ready for the answer? Let's see, what do we have? Smartphones. Ooh, we have a guess for smartphones. That's a really good guess. GenAI. Ooh, that's a good guess from our audience. It's not quite. I think you will be surprised when you know which technology they're talking about. This quote is from 370 to 360 BC. That's a really long time ago. And this is Socrates, and he is talking about writing. Long time ago, talking about writing. He says writing is a dangerous technology because it can lead to a loss of memory. It is a reminder rather than a true art of memory. Do you think that about writing? It's a reminder rather than a true art of memory? I know that when I need to remember things, I write them down. So I think this. Let's do the next one. Students' abilities will be ruined by this technology. They won't be able to learn from their errors, and teachers won't be able to help them. They won't learn basic skills. Which technology do you think they are talking about? Students' abilities being ruined. So much so that teachers won't be able to help them. We have, this time it's definitely GenAI. That's a good guess. Oh, we have, Google Calendar for the previous one. That was a good guess on that previous one. I've never had anyone guess that. Fantastic job there. So teachers won't be able to help them. GenAI. They won't learn basic skills. Do we have any other guesses? Computers. Ooh, that's a good guess. Are we ready for the answer? I know, I'm so excited. We are talking about calculators. This is something that's come up over the past 50 years when it comes to calculators. We've been saying this about calculators for almost 50 years. This particular quote comes from 2015, nearly 40 years after the calculator was introduced. Someone said this. We have someone saying, the next one is GenAI. Let's see. We have one more to go. The technology is a powerful tool, but it can also be a crutch. If students rely too heavily on the technology, they may never learn. Technology is a powerful tool, but it can also be a crutch. We have someone who said this one has to be GenAI, even before we saw the quote. Are there any other guesses as to what it might be? This one could be GenAI. It could maybe be something else. Let's see what we have. So Heather Gaddis said, a word processing program? Ooh. Royal English says, this is great, so high five. I also include adapted level A2 in the handouts I make with GenAI. Ooh, I love that. They're in Royal English. You tell them A2, letting them know what their levels, or any other level, A2 or whatever level they're at. Yeah, so we can differentiate the instruction. One of the things that I have in my beginning classes is I have students from level A1 to level B1. Yeah, A1 to B1. So for each individual student, I might give them a different level depending on where they're at. So we have a couple more guesses. Computers, hard disks, the internet. Ooh, these are all great guesses. It's time to find out which one it is. We're talking about Google Translate. This is in 2017. I don't know about you guys, but when Google Translate came out, a lot of my colleagues were very concerned about what was happening with language learner as a result of 2017. And so this is 4 individuals from the University of Cambridge wrote this piece where they're talking about the potential dangers of Google Translate. So not GenAI, but did you know that Google Translate is artificial intelligence and does now use GenAI in doing some of its back-end translations? What these quotes show to me is something highlighted by the work of Gardner in what is called the hype cycle. So maybe you've seen this before, where technology comes out and there's a lot of excitement around it. So we have the technology trigger, the peak of inflated expectations, where everyone is so excited. They're like, look at what this technology can do. And then you have the trough of disillusionment, where they're like, hey, wait, it can't do all of these things. It's not great. It's not wonderful. And then coming up to the slope of enlightenment, where you say, hey, wait, it actually does have some usefulness. And the plateau of productivity, where you're now utilizing the technology in effective ways based on what it actually can do. Now, GenAI has gone through this hype cycle multiple times now. Technologies just keep coming out. They keep coming out. They keep coming out. They just keep saying additional technologies. And with each one, I see this hype cycle happening over and over and over and over again. And I don't know about you, but I get a little bit tired of this hype cycle. As we previously said, we've done it more than once with previous technologies, all the way back to the invention of writing. We have someone who says they think that we're still in the peak of inflated expectations. I think for some Gen AIs, we are, depending on where you are. I like answer to the previous questions. Wikipedia. Oh, I like Wikipedia as an answer. Cell phones and spell checkers. Spell checkers, that's a great one. That definitely shows the hype cycle with it, that people thought people are going to lose their spelling in it when they got to that trough of disillusionment. Look at it can do the spell checking for us. Oh my gosh, no one's going to be able to spell anymore. And now spell checkers are just a natural part of most word processing programs of our autocorrects, so much so that sometimes it autocorrects for me in ways that I don't want it to in the spell checker. I don't know about for you, but it leads to some fun things. So let's get some high fives for building a strategy to mitigate the hype cycle. This is what we're going to talk about here in this section. How can we mitigate the hype cycle so that we aren't tired going through it over and over and over again, but can effectively use these technologies? Nice. I'm loving the comments. Keep them coming. Okay, so this is what I do and what I do with my students to help mitigate the hype cycle. But before I get to that, I want to clarify something about artificial intelligence because I see a lot of confusion surrounding this. That is, there are different kinds of AI. Now, this is a really simplified distinction that I'm going to present here. So for my artificial intelligence specialists, my computer scientists out there, don't come after me for the oversimplification. This is just a way to help us remember that there are different kinds of AIs. So the first kind is typically algorithmic AI. And algorithmic AI is human generated, and it only provides recommendations based on its programming. Things such as Siri, the notifications you get from apps such as Duolingo when it says, hey, it's time to practice, text prediction on your phone, what it thinks will be the next thing you're going to say, and the recommendations that you get on sites like Netflix that recommend things that you should be watching based on your previous. So this is algorithmic AI. I like that someone pulled the abacus in our previous examples because calculators were something that they were worried about in connection with the abacus. That's fantastic. Okay, so in addition to algorithmic AI, we have generative AI. And a big distinction between algorithmic AI and generative AI is that generative AI is not human generated. Unlike with the algorithms that are programmed by humans, this one is not. It's being chosen by the computer itself. Things such as ChatGPT or Gemini, or for us language teachers, TWE, and teachers in general, Magic School, these are generative AIs. They're not human generated. I give this distinction because it's just difficult to function in today's society without touching algorithmic AI. It's so prevalent in so many of the things that we use that it's hard to avoid algorithmic AI. But I think you can and sometimes should avoid or reduce your use of generative AI. So let me show you how. I use an AI decision tree to help me decide if I should or shouldn't use GenAI for a task. Because just because I can use GenAI doesn't mean that I should use GenAI. I also have my students create an AI decision tree to help them think more critically about their AI use. And today's example is going to be one that I do with my students, but you can create your own because everyone's AI decision tree is going to be different. So start with the question, should I use generative AI? And then this, if you're familiar with decision trees, is followed by a series of yes and no questions. It's important that the questions on your decision tree are yes and no questions. Let's look at an example. Should I use generative AI? Again, this is for a student. The first question they may ask is, do I have enough support without GenAI? Do I have enough support without GenAI? And yes, if they have enough support without GenAI, maybe they shouldn't use GenAI. But no, in this case, we're going to ask another question. Is the energy used worth it? Now we're thinking more critically about our GenAI use. How much energy is it going to take in order to get the output that we want? We know that it's approximately, for a 100-word generation, it takes about 1 bottle of water. And then that's not counting the electricity costs. So in doing this, I'm able to talk to my students more critically about GenAI in general, how it's used, what kinds of impacts it's going to have on our environment. So in this case, if the answer is no, then they think maybe I shouldn't use it. Is the energy used worth it? No, maybe I shouldn't use it. But yes, then I might ask another question. Is there enough privacy protection? Is there enough privacy protection for me as a user? Now we're getting into some more important things for our students to critically think about and for us to critically think about before we decide to use GenAI. Now, as I said, everyone's AI decision tree is going to look different. So what question would you put at the top of your generative AI decision tree? What question would you put at the top? At the top of my AI decision tree, I put, is there enough resources in other places for me to do what I intend to do with GenAI? So if I have other places that I'm getting teaching materials and they have the resources I need, I'm going to use those rather than GenAI. So what question would you put at the top of your GenAI decision tree? Again, it's different from everyone. There's no right or wrong answer here. The point is not to not use AI, but to think critically before you use GenAI. Is it really the right tool based on these considerations? Let's get some high fives for our AI decision trees and high fives for thinking critically before we use GenAI. Let's see. Ooh, here's a great question. Can I write whatever I want to ask GenAI myself? Ooh, I love that question. If I'm going to have GenAI write it, maybe I actually could write it myself. So I should do it myself. Is it safe to share this info with the commercial companies? I really love that one. Is it safe to share it with the commercial companies? And Heather says, is it appropriate for the task? I love your thinking pedagogically there, Heather. Is it appropriate for the task? Fantastic work there. I hope that you will build your AI decision trees. I often change the questions I have on my decision trees, and we revisit with my students where we think, are these still the questions that we want to have on here? Or have we learned new things that maybe are more important than what we have on our decision tree? Okay. So for those of you who would like to learn more about the topics that I covered today, here are the references from my session today, and you can explore them and explore some of the activities more, because I pulled some of my activities from these references. Great. I can't paste them in the chat. I'm sorry. I don't have access to the chat, but thank you so much for asking. So I can only put it on screen. But this session is being recorded and archived, so you can come back to it and get that shot. Before we get to questions, so it is time for questions. So if you do have questions, post those in the chat, And while I wait for those questions to come in, I want to answer the most common question that I get, which is, what do I use to create my presentations? And so I use a program that's called Prezi to create my presentations. And to get it on screen with me, I use a program called Prezi Video. This is all in the same suite. It's all in the same application. I just use Prezi Present to actually create and Prezi Video to put it on screen. You can just use Prezi Video. And that's where I started. For years, I did all of my presentations using Prezi Video. And then I started figuring out how I could build them in Prezi Present in order to create a little bit more interest, a little bit more interactivity with them and build them a little bit different. So it is now time for questions. We have some time for questions. If you have any questions, go ahead and post them in the chat. While I wait for those questions, I want to introduce you to my friend Sylvie. Sylvie is my travel buddy. He hangs out with me, helps make sure I stay on task, and helps me to just overall have fun. So if you noticed in the pictures in the beginning, you might have seen him in the pictures. So he travels around with me. And also he helps me to make sure that I get good sleep, because he loves to sleep. And sometimes I'm doing so many tasks that I don't have time for sleep, or I don't sleep as much as I should. Another thing that's really great, regardless of whether or not you teach young children or you teach older individuals, having a stuffed animal in your classroom can help reduce the affective filter for your students. So Sylvie will be my conversation buddy, and I'll practice my tasks before I have my students do it. So that, because I often teach beginning level students, but even when I teach older level students, they love to see who I have. They love to make voices. Sylvie has a voice. Hello, I'm Sylvie. And then I can show my students what I want them to do in class, both in person and online. So we have our questions coming in. How do students react to the GenAI tasks in the classroom? That's really fantastic. My students react differently. Some of my students are super excited and they love using GenAI. And some of my students are not so excited and they really want to avoid using GenAI. And that means that anytime I'm asking my students to use GenAI, I make sure that they know that if they don't want to use it, I will give them an alternate task for them, because I don't want to force my students to use this technology that they may be afraid of doing. I do this with all technologies, right? Not just GenAI, but any technology I'm using in my classroom. If my students are really concerned about their privacy, they don't want to use the technology, I give them alternate tasks that still accomplish the same thing. I have relatively few students who say no, because I use technologies that are approved by our institution and our school. So they're using their school accounts to access them. So I typically use Microsoft Copilot as the GenAI, or I use Perplexity because it doesn't require my students to log in. But Copilot, our institution has a contract and they're able to use their school account. And then, are they excited to learn more and use the tool? It is very motivating for my students, right? They do get really excited. Oh my gosh, my students love debating GenAI. They ask me more questions, how to craft better arguments. They build better arguments. They really negotiate the skills that you need for debate. It's really fantastic. When they come back to regular exercises, do they lose interest in just doing regular grammar tasks, for example? Well, my classroom is really interactive. And so my students love all the different kinds of tasks that we do. So I do a lot of things called dice frames to practice grammar. And I use quizzing apps like Blockit is my favorite right now. I don't know if that's available in Russia, but it's similar to Kahoot and Quizlet. So they love all the different kinds of tasks that we do. And one of the things that I've noticed is that using this kind of technology helps my students to actually really want to learn the things more, so that when we get to the activities, that they are more prepared. So I find they're actually more engaged within the whole classroom when I use these kinds of technologies, because they really want to be successful in the task. They see a real life use for the things that we're using in class. So Heather Gaddis asked, does it comply with the institution's rules? That is such a great question, Heather. It's important that you do know what your institutional policies are for GenAI use and follow those. So my institution allows the use of GenAI as long as you're using it ethically, responsibly, and in a way prescribed by the teacher. And so because these are things that are prescribed by me, then they are able to be used in the classroom. Now, me as a teacher, I also have an AI use policy within my classroom. So I let my students know how they can and can't use AI, not only in the class, but also on individual assignments. When we're working on individual assignments, I make sure that they know when they can and can't use AI. So I love that you brought that up, Heather. It is very important for us to make sure that we are complying with our institutional policies and rules, as well as developing our own classroom policies and rules, especially if they aren't there at the institution. So Royal English asks, does it allow us to do new things, or maybe at least know things more easily, which ties back to Sammer? It does allow you to do new things. So one of the things that it allows students to do is to get a personal tutor. Now, how effective the tutors are right now is up for debate, right? So there's a lot of discussion over whether or not they're really, really good. But Conmigo is doing a lot with creating that personalized tutor. And what it does is it takes a good student and can help them be a great student. And it can take a great student and help them become an exceptional student. Excuse me. So you can do more and be better, but on the opposite side, you can also lose a lot of time using GenAI. So that's one of the things that I ask in my own personal AI decision tree, is whether or not this is actually going to save me time. Is this going to save me time? And that's almost at the top of my decision tree. It's not number one, it's like number 3, I think, right now, because it doesn't always save me time. Sometimes when I try to use GenAI, I have to modify whatever it gives me a whole lot more than if I built it from the ground up. And so the more I use AI, the less I kind of use AI, because I really see what it's good at and what it's not good at. So tying that back to Sammer. So it can get you to those higher levels, and sort of add that at that redefinition level. Having a personal tutor for each of your students, I think once it's like really out there and deployed, and we can feel comfortable about the responses these tutors are getting our students, it's going to be really powerful in redefining our classrooms. In terms of whether or not AI can teach you something or not, one of my colleagues, Jeff Kuhn, he says that we really shouldn't be using GenAI to teach our students, that GenAI should be helping us to let our students work with the language and manage the language, and really stay away from having GenAI completely teach our students. Now, that doesn't mean our students can't learn from it. It just means that it shouldn't be replacing us. We still are the experts in teaching and learning languages. And we should be using that knowledge and that expertise to help our students navigate through using things like the gradual release of responsibility model. We have the question, are you on the resilient side or the gloomy side of the AI debate? And what is your opinion on the future of AI in the classroom? Resilient side or gloomy side? Well, I sit in the middle. I'm not on one or the other. I am in the middle. I think that AI is a super powerful tool that you can do some really amazing things with it. And I have done some really fun, really amazing, really engaging things with it. I also think it can be a big waste of time and waste of energy. And so I'm really careful as to when I use it and how I use it. I use it more to teach people how to use it than I sometimes want to. I think about the energy costs every time I use it to demo things for individuals. I'm like, I'm just demonstrating something for individuals. So one of the things I'm really working on right now is trying to figure out ways to save my practice chats that I'm practicing before I actually demo things for individuals, for my students and things like that, to see how that works so that I don't then recreate that task live with individuals, costing energy when maybe I don't need to, when I can just show them the chat of what I asked previously. I'm still working on that, but I'm hoping that that will be a way that I can reduce my energy consumption and usage of GenAI. And my opinion on the future of AI in the classroom, my opinion, I think that classrooms will be wide and varied. Like we've known from more than 50 years, longer than I've been alive, of incorporating technology in the classroom, that there's going to be wide variations of who uses the different technologies and why they use them. And that goes back to so many things, the infrastructure, the feelings of the individuals themselves towards technology, the needs for the communities that they're in. And so I don't think there's going to be a place where every classroom in the world maybe has GenAI or AI in the classroom, but it is potentially something that could happen, but I just don't see it happening. And if it does, I am going to be long gone before it happens. And so no one will remember that I said this because I will be gone. So we have another question from Royal English. Doing research outside of GenAI window is usually very hard for students. How to facilitate this external research? Or you're just blessed with proactive students. I am not blessed with proactive students. I am not at all. But I am blessed with librarians who are really fantastic at helping students navigate research. So if you have access to librarians and can partner with them to create materials and to have them work with your students, that's really fantastic. And so I work with our librarians to really help them understand how to talk to students at the level that I'm at, so that when they're showcasing to students how to conduct research, how to do research, they're really working at the level of students. So we collaborate and work together. And so that's really a fantastic way. There are a number of online librarian resources that you can tap into at institutions where they provide guides for doing research. So if you can find one at the level of your students, or for you to learn how to do better research so that you can then work with your students. And the way that I teach a lot of my students these skills is using the gradual release of responsibility model. Because one of the things that I think about when we're talking about AI use is that oftentimes students use AI because of reasons that maybe I can help with, right? I haven't provided my students enough support to be able to successfully complete the task on themselves. They don't have enough time. That doesn't mean that it gets all of the students. But if I think about, do my students have enough support? Do they have enough time? Do they have the skills to be able to do this? Then I'm less likely to have students misuse GenAI. Now, as we wrap up, as promised, I really want to hear what one idea you're going to take away with you from this session. So post those in the chat. What is something you're going to take away with you? Anything you would like, especially if it's related to the classroom. But even if it's not related to the classroom, I'd love to hear it. And I'm so happy that you joined me today. My friend Sylvie, hello. He's happy that you're here as we kicked off International Education Week. And I really hope that you did get at least one valuable thing out of your time this morning and you felt like it was time well spent, and post those ideas in the chat. And for me, one of the things that I really took away from this was really adding into the things that I'm saying, the importance of making sure we're following within those institutional guidelines. So I'm really grateful to, I think it was Heather who mentioned the importance that we are following within those institutional guidelines as we are incorporating these technologies in the classroom. So really fantastic, really fantastic. We need some high fives as we wrap up our session today. There are more sessions all this week, and I hope that you guys will join us in some of those sessions the rest of this week, and have a really fantastic time here as we celebrate our global sharing and global learning and global exchanges here during International Education Week.